Yeah, this ties quite nicely into one of the last questions that we had. What is AI? And it's something that it's one question that I address with my students, one of the first days of class, because it's people use AI in many different ways, right? So what I tell them is there's the two definitions of AI. There's the hard definition of it and the soft definition of it. The hard definition is a system that challenges human intelligence in a general sense, right? And that is something that is, we don't yet know if we'll ever get to it, right? It's something like a humanoid robot that you can talk to and you can, introduce to your parents and then show them a problem and then they can play with it, that sort of thing. We don't know if we'll ever get to it. The soft definition of AI, which is the one that we're broadly using at this conference, is, at least the way my definition for that is any model that is done, or any source of information that is done using informatics tools or computer science tools that provides information within a system that improves human decision making. And that is obviously always a moving target, right? It changes through time, but it includes a lot of different things. Okay, so I talked a bit about my background. I have an MD, originally from Spain. I did a postdoc at Mayo Clinic, PhD in clinical informatics, became assistant professor of medicine and healthcare systems engineering at Mayo, then went back to Harvard to do a master's, and now I'm adjunct at Harvard as well as having my daytime job at Mayo doing AI for the Department of ENT. So, some disclosures about some of the work that I'm going to present today. It's one of the projects that I worked at for the Department of ENT. So we do have licensing revenue from this company for the algorithm, and I'm a paid consultant for the company for further algorithm development and refinement. It's all through Mayo. So you'll see the fundamental theorem of informatics, right? The idea is that we design an AI system that helps humans make better decisions. That's kind of the goal. And one of the key things is, this is the pyramid of, it's more like a stage, right? You go from data sources, data positioning and storage, data mining, model development. You want to go all the way to improve decision making. But there is this big barrier here. Does this have a laser? Yeah. There's this big barrier here right now from model development to operationalization and deployment, and you get to user interface and implementation. There's thousands of models developed and published every year looking at AI in healthcare, like applications of these models in healthcare. Very few of them actually make it to operationalization and deployment. There's a handful of them every year that make it. So what is this barrier, and how can we overcome it, right? That is some of what I'll be talking about, and how we approach some of that for this project that we did implement, and it's still in operation. I think it's been 2-3 years since we put it in place, and it's still working and still helping our clinicians with that specific part of their decision-making process. So one of the key distinctions between these two, and that in part explains this barrier that I mentioned here before, right, between model development, which is essentially training the machine learning model and actually putting it into place where it actually helps people make better decisions, is this distinction between the research AI and data science and the applied AI and data science. And you can think of it as research AI and data science, and this is an example that I stole from Cassie Kozyrkov, who works at Google. She has this analogy where she says, well, the research AI and data science is developing new models or algorithms. It's like building a microwave, right? And then you need to learn all of the physics of how to build a microwave and how to make it work and all of that. And if you want to improve it, you want to design some improvements for it. But that is very different from actually using the microwave or using the oven in an industrial kitchen, right? The skill sets that you need and the considerations that you need to have are very different, right? So in an applied AI and data science setting, your goal is to implement those models. You're not necessarily developing new ways of training AI models, you're using whatever's been created before, like XGBoost or CNNs or whatever it might be. And you want to use them, and you want to build that system that takes the data, processes it, runs the model, and deploys that information to the decision makers that are typically people. So you need to understand all of that, and you need to understand that embedded in the system of the people that are already doing the work. So you need tools like data science, informatics, systems engineering to run it. And you need people with that type of approach, and you typically need a team of people that can bring in different perspectives. So this is the type of work that I mostly do. I do have some research in more of the development piece, but most of the work that I do is applied. This is the example. This is the slide that I took from Cassie. The idea is, or the analogy is, that you go from data to algorithms, which are kind of the appliances. With that, you make a model specific to your problem, and then you serve those predictions that are like dishes. You serve those predictions to your customers, to your users. So I'm going to go through the steps that I believe are important to take into account when you're doing a model, and I'm going to go through them with the example of the project that I worked on. So the first thing is consider the system. Think about where is your algorithm going to be embedded in, what is the system look like, who is making what decisions and what touch points with the patient, and then what information are you going to provide and at what point. Data quality is thinking about, well, where are you going to get your data in real time to provide those predictions in real time, which ties into how to select the model that is appropriate to this, and we'll talk a little bit about that and how we chose the model. Sometimes not the most sophisticated or the most cutting-edge model is going to be the best for your use case. Sometimes a more simple model can be just as good in terms of accuracy and have a lot of other benefits in terms of, for example, explainability. Or in our case, for example, it was very important that we could tweak the model manually for certain things. The other piece is the human-computer synergy, which is how is the person going to interact with the information that you're going to serve to them? How are they going to interpret it? And what information are they going to be bringing in? What information processing are they going to be bringing in? The other thing that is really important is change management. You're going to be changing the way people work when you implement some of these AI models. So you need to give them enough lead time and understand how people learn, particularly when they're already practicing, and give them enough time to adjust to the new process. And then how are you going to measure the results to make sure that what you're doing is actually being useful? This is all a little abstract, but it'll become a bit more specific in a minute. This a quote that I really like from Chris Hadfield. When he was asked what's the most difficult part of your job, he's an astronaut, and he was commander of the space station for a certain amount of time. And he said, yeah, orbital mechanics is nothing. That's the easy part, is the people that are complicated, right? So it's very similar in applied AI. The models themselves, it's something you can learn in 6 months to a year, and then it's something that takes you a few weeks maybe once you have the data ready. But getting that into the people is what's often challenging. So the example that I'm going to run through is building a triage algorithm for balanced clinic patients. So these are patients with dizziness, chronic dizziness, which we define as more than, I think it's 6 months of dizziness. So this is a very severe thing, and it affects people's lives a lot, right? Imagine feeling dizzy constantly throughout your day, or maybe randomly here and there. It really prevents people from having a normal life that they can enjoy. It's a very prevalent problem. It's estimated that about 69 million Americans have experienced symptoms of a vestibular disorder, which typically occurs with dizziness. And about 50% of people over 65 years of age have experienced some symptoms of dizziness. Of course, this is not chronic dizziness. Chronic dizziness is a bit more specific. But the issue here with dizziness is that they can be seen by a combination of many different specialties. In our practice, that's 5 specialties. So Mayo had developed, before I joined, this multi-specialty way to address these patients that needed, not all of them need to be seen by all 5 specialties, right? Some of them need only a combination of those. But of course, you have the problem of, well, how you do determine before the patient comes in, who do they need to see, right? You don't want to send them to all 5, but you also don't want to send them to one and then have the patient have to wait again for, if that one person determines that the patient needs to be seen by someone else, you don't want to have the patient wait, particularly because at Mayo we get a lot of patients that are what we call destination patients that are coming to Mayo specifically from out of town. We want to be able to know what appointments they're likely to need so that we can schedule them all in advance, that they can see everyone that they need to see within a few days when they're in town. So the problem is that we were having our clinicians go through the patient's charts and go through the patient's information and spending a lot of time doing that. And that was time that could be better spent actually seeing patients. So that was the task. Develop an algorithm that helps us save time in determining what appointments are the patients going to need. So this is the full integrated multi-specialty program that includes people from ENT, from neurology, behavioral medicine, which is psychiatry, audiology, physical therapy, and so on. And we were spending about 40% of a full-time equivalent of a clinician in triaging these patients, right? That's a lot of extra patients that we could see. So the project had essentially 3 steps. One is we moved the data collection to an electronic system. The way we were collecting data was through paper questionnaires that we were mailing the patient. The patient was filling them out on paper and then mailing them back to us. That was not only very time-consuming for everyone, and you had to wait for the snail mail to go all the way there and back. But it also didn't allow us to use the data for anything, really. So we collected the data, we moved it to an electronic questionnaire system, so now they receive a link. And then we standardized it. The other thing that we wanted to do is reduce the staff workload, as I mentioned. So system redesign, the first step was to understand the process of how this was happening and what we wanted to change. So we had a couple of different touch points where this was being reviewed. It was being reviewed by 2 people. And it included, as I mentioned, this being mailed to the patient. We had all of these copies of patient, I'm covering it with my hand, all of these copies of patient questionnaires that we had to go through and enter it into an electronic data set so we could train our models. We wanted to move it into a system where it was electronic, right? The patient calls, we tell them, okay, we have some questions for you so we can better determine who you need to see. And then based on that, we sell them the questionnaire, we run it through the model. So the way it worked is we send the patient the questionnaire. Once we got the data back, we run it through the model, and then we presented that information, those recommendations, to a clinician, and then the clinician reviewed those recommendations together with some part of the patient's questionnaire that we could not handle with the algorithm, which was the free text data. We did not have enough data to run a natural language processing model. And then after that, that information was sent back to the patient appointment coordinator to basically talk to the patient and say, okay, we need to schedule these 3 appointments. When are you available? And all of that. So that part was still handled by a human. And we basically saved time from the clinician in that in between. Data quality, I mentioned, I'm going to run because this is taking much longer than I anticipated. So we migrated to the electronic system, as I mentioned. This is the way the questionnaire looked for the patient. They could fill it out on their phone as well. The model we selected, as I mentioned, was a decision tree, which has the advantage, even though it's not as sophisticated from a statistical point of view, it's somewhat limited, but it has the advantage that you can see it, right? And you can see it and you can see what the decision breaks are. So we could do things, for example, like look at, once we build the first model, we could see, okay, with this model, how many patients are we sending to neurology? And can our neurologists handle that volume of patients, or do we need to make it more strict, right? So that at least on the first pass, we send fewer patients to neurology. And then, of course, if we send a patient to another specialty and they think they need a neurologist, they're going to send a referral. But initially, at least, we limit the number of patients that we're sending to neurology to only patients that we're more certain that are going to need it. So using a decision tree allowed us to tweak that manually and kind of go through that iterative process, not only before we deployed the model, but after, right? If the population that we're receiving starts to change and we see, okay, we're sending too many patients to, I don't know, neurology or psychiatry, we want to change that, we can manually tweak that very easily and in a way that is very transparent for the clinical leadership. So we trained that model, and then we compared it to essentially the manual triage process that we had in place before, and it was very accurate. This is the accuracy data after 2 years of the model being in place. So our overall accuracy was 87%. We were aiming for 75, so we were very, very happy with this. This lower one here is because we had someone leave the practice, so that was no longer relevant for a portion of it. But the other ones, you can see the accuracy is very high, and all of them are above that benchmark that we set for ourselves of 75%. The human-computer synergy comes in when I mentioned that we had the physician review the free text. So part of the questions that we asked the patient about what type of symptoms they're having, a couple of them are free text, right? We asked them, okay, please describe your symptoms in your own words, right? And that was not something that we could handle with an algorithm because we didn't have enough data for it. And that was something that it took the physicians very little time, right? It's typically a short paragraph that the patients write. So it was very good for the physicians to just look at the recommendations from the algorithm, taking all of the structured data into account, read the patient's description and see, okay, based on these descriptions, is there something that I think needs to change in what the algorithm recommends? And then they changed it, again, 13% of the time they changed something. And then based on that, it took them very little time. They didn't have to review all of the patient's answers because the algorithm was doing most of it. This is, we also show the physician what are the relevant features for the algorithm that the algorithm is taking into account based on also what they have told us was important for them. And the patient's description of the symptoms. This is not a real patient. Yeah, I mentioned, and then they can see the model's recommendations here. Then we had to implement it, and this was a good undertaking with IT to make sure that the model's predictions were being taken from the questionnaire side and being processed, and then being served back into that same system. We had to figure out exactly where the physicians were going to look at those recommendations, so we had to change the process for that. But it worked out well. We're doing a new iteration of this with other divisions within the department, and for those, we're changing this a little bit. So it needs to be tailored a little bit to the specific practice. This time we're going to be showing those recommendations within Epic. So now we need to figure out how to put the data back into Epic, how to communicate with Epic on the backside, and so on. Yeah, I'm not going to go through this. And then change management piece was that aspect of making sure that people understood how the process was going to change. That was something that we did 2 or 3 times, and we used this. We had very high patient acceptance on the patient side. 95% of them could fill out the questionnaire online, and only 5% needed to be guided by the appointment coordinator over the phone. And then on the staff side, they were very happy with the new system. I like this model for change management, which is, again, change management is making sure that people understand how you're going to change their process using AI. And you do that through building them awareness of change, that change is coming, and a desire based on your understanding of why that is needed, so that they understand and want this change. Then you need to show them what the new process is going to be and make sure that they have the ability to do what you're going to ask of them in the new process. And then you need to do that at least a couple times to make sure that everyone that you're going to be changing their process is familiar with it and is able to do it. And then you have to do reinforcement right before you start the new process and then throughout to make sure that people are understanding it. So it's not as simple as saying, well, you have an algorithm, you put it in place, and then you forget about it, right? That is something that I think everyone understands now, but a few years ago when we were doing this was a fairly new concept. And then measuring the results. So our main goal was to save clinicians time. So we were able to save 75% of the time that our clinicians were using in triaging these patients, with essentially very similar accuracy to what we were having before. The other aspect of this is that loss in accuracy was not critical, right? Because the patient was not going to miss an appointment because we didn't determine it, because we didn't assign that appointment to them. Any clinician that saw the patient could still get a new appointment for them. So that is an important consideration when you're doing this. When you're losing a little bit of accuracy, what is the effect of that accuracy loss? Is it something that can harm patients, or is this something that is very unlikely to harm patients? In our case, this was very unlikely to harm patients. We were not changing their medications or anything like that. We were just changing their appointments. And there was an extra layer of safety in case a patient needed an appointment that we hadn't initially determined. We also reduced the number of appointments that were needed for patients with the same good outcomes that we had been getting. We were able to reduce the number of surgical appointments for patients that did not need surgery, which is a big problem, right? It's essentially a patient comes to the surgeon and the surgeon is like, well, I don't think you need surgery, so I don't think you really needed to see me. And that's a dissatisfaction for both the patient and the surgeon. So we were able to reduce that. I'll end with the acknowledgements slide for everyone that worked on the project as well. And I will take any questions that you have for the 5 minutes that we have left.